Well, why don't you use the opportunity to ask the PM a question, just directly, put one to him and PM can reply.
Are you the biggest spending government since Whitlam? So 40 years, in 40 years, there has not been a higher spending government than your government. Is that correct?
Well, that's not true, except for the one that you were a part of.
Just not true.
And during COVID, of course it's true. And it's also true that there was a $78 billion deficit planned in the 2022 election. You had the March 2022 budget. The election was in May and money splashed out, including the cut to fuel excise. All this money out the door, a $78 billion deficit projected. We turned that into a surplus. We had a $100 billion turnaround. Debt is $178 billion less now than what it was anticipated to be in the March 2022 budget. The previous government promised a surplus in its first year in 2014 and every year thereafter. They never delivered one. The only governments that have delivered two budget surpluses in a row is the one that I lead in the last 20 years, going back to the Howard government.
Mr Dutton, if you want to reply, you can, but haven't you lost the moral high ground because you've copied most of the government's policies, including Medicare and various other commitments yet to come, like the ADF spending, which we're still awaiting?
Well, Kieran, a couple of points. One is that this is the highest spending government in 40 years. That's the fact. Now, the fact is, as the Prime Minister alluded to, but didn't quite get to the truthful point, over COVID, he supported all of the spending that was committed to by the coalition and $50 billion more. That's what was proposed by Labor at the time. So let's put all of that on the record. We have opposed $100 billion worth of spending under this government. They've spent an extra $425 billion, and that is why Australians have lived through basically 2 years of going backwards in their own household budgets. And it's why they're racking up $1.2 trillion worth of debt.
Mr Albanese, your question now to the opposition leader. Thanks.
Well, my question to Peter is that you have opposed every cost of living measure that we've put forward over the last 3 years in government. You now are going to an election with a nuclear plan that will build 7 nuclear reactors that will cost $600 billion to provide 4% of power sometime in the 2040s. What are you going to cut to pay for it? Because the private sector won't fund nuclear reactors because it doesn't stack up. So taxpayers, including everyone in this room, is going to have to pay for this nuclear plan.
Well, Anthony, with respect, that's a very dishonest proposition you put. So the CSIRO report puts the capital cost of nuclear at about $120 billion. Now, your plan, independently costed by Frontier Economics, a company used by the Labor Party and probably the best economist when it comes to looking at energy policy in the country, puts the Labor Party policy of renewables only at $600 billion. Our policy is 44% cheaper than that, $231 billion in total, $331 billion in total. The Labor Party's proposal is $263 billion more. Now, the Prime Minister, Chris Bowen, has never disputed that figure. There are 29 nuclear reactors being built in China at the moment. The United Kingdom Labor government has just announced that they can't achieve net zero by 2050 without cutting down on the approval times for small modular reactors and nuclear in those systems. We are paying 3 times the cost for electricity compared to Ontario, where they have nuclear in the system. In France, there is 70% nuclear in the system. Our policy is to make sure that we can underpin our economy with a stable energy market for the next 100 years. So the amortisation period, or the life of the nuclear reactors, lasts between 80 and 100 years, and that cost is spread over that. I just say, if the renewables are so much cheaper, as the Prime Minister keeps telling you, why has he broken his promise of a $275 a year cut to your electricity bill, when in actual fact it's gone up by $1,300 under this government, and families are struggling to pay their bills? And the difference between the two policies is that our policy is 44% cheaper, and in the interim, we increase the supply of gas into the market because gas helps create electricity. Gas helps create steel and bricks, and it will help with the construction sector, where we've got huge cost inflation at the moment. It will help bring down the prices for farmers and manufacturers and producers. And at the moment, the gas that we're exporting to foundation contracts and to many of our partners is important, but there is a lot of gas that's exported that we could turn back into the domestic market. We can reduce, as the independent analysis has shown, the cost of gas by about 15%, and that means we can bring down the cost of electricity. We can bring down the costs across the economy otherwise, and that is, I think, transformational for our economy, but of course opposed by the Prime Minister.
Well, let's hear from him.
Well, the only gas policy that the Coalition have is the gaslighting of the Australian public. He disagrees with all of the experts which are out there, whether it's the Australian Energy Market Operator, everyone who looks at it. If the nuclear plant stacked up, the private sector would invest in it. But everyone who looks at it says it's the most expensive form of new energy. What we support is renewables backed by gas. We introduced the Future Gas Strategy. We have the gas security mechanism that we introduced in Parliament that they voted against to guarantee that domestic supply. So we want renewables backed by gas, backed by batteries, backed by hydro. 24 out of the 28 coal-fired power stations in Australia announced their closure during the former government. They were there for a decade. There was no new coal-fired power stations built, and there was no nuclear plant.